German suburb during the winter of the 1990s, the street lay under a heavy blanket of snow. The night was unnaturally silent, as though the world itself held its breath. Neighbors who looked toward the house at the end of the road felt something strange. No lights glowed from its windows. No footsteps crunched in the snow. Even the chimney, once puffing with warmth, was cold and lifeless. The wind crept between the houses, whistling against shutters, making them shudder like teeth chattering in the cold. People whispered to each other about the eerie stillness, about how silence seemed to pour out from that house like a fog. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of something unfinished, something waiting. The air carried an invisible weight, pressing on anyone who dared to glance too long at the darkened windows. Concern grew rapidly when the family inside the house failed to answer repeated calls. Days had passed and letters piled in the mailbox. Finally, the authorities were alerted. 2 officers arrived at the scene, their flashlights piercing the frozen night. Each step toward the house crunched loudly, echoing off the walls of the empty street, as if warning them to turn back. They reached the heavy wooden door. Its paint was peeling, the handle stiff with cold. When they knocked, the sound echoed strangely, as though the house swallowed the noise whole. No answer came. The officers exchanged tense glances, their breath misting in the icy air. Then, with effort, they forced the door open. The hinges groaned, and the darkness inside seemed alive, like a void stretching outward to greet them. They stepped in and immediately felt the suffocating silence pressing close. The living room told the first fragments of the story. A coffee cup lay shattered on the carpet, its porcelain fragments glinting under the officers' flashlights like teeth. A hammer rested nearby, its position oddly deliberate, almost staged. Chairs were pushed aside as though something violent had erupted. Yet no voices, no cries, no living soul remained. The air was unnaturally cold, colder than the winter outside. A lamp in the corner flickered weakly, throwing jagged shadows against the walls. Every movement seemed to disturb the silence, every breath too loud. One of the officers felt the hair rise on the back of his neck, as though unseen eyes were watching. The faint scent of something metallic, sharp, unmistakable, lingered in the air. The living room, once ordinary, had become a canvas of dread. They moved cautiously into the dining room. At first glance, it seemed undisturbed, but then the truth revealed itself. A chair stood out, ropes dangling from its arms, frayed and twisted, as though someone had struggled desperately to break free. The tablecloth was half pulled to the floor, cutlery scattered across it like the aftermath of a storm. The wallpaper seemed to ripple in the dim light. Though it was still, the silence in the room felt heavier here, as if the walls themselves remembered what had taken place. Shadows stretched unnaturally, forming shapes that almost looked like figures standing watch. The officers paused, listening. Somewhere in the house, a faint creak echoed. Perhaps a stair, perhaps the house itself breathing. Their hearts pounded as they realized this was not simply abandonment. This was a place where horror had unfolded, where time itself seemed stained. Upstairs, the officers entered the children's bedroom, and the sight froze them in place. Toys lay scattered across the floor, a small wooden train, a doll with one glassy eye staring blankly, blocks spelling out nothing at all. 2 beds stood against the walls, their blankets tangled as if the children had been taken suddenly from their rest. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting pale silver beams across the room, making every toy look like a silent witness. There was no sound, not even the distant hum of the world outside. The silence here was unbearable, heavier than downstairs. One of the officers bent to pick up the doll, only to drop it quickly, unsettled by how cold it felt, as if it had been lying untouched for years, though only days had passed. The room held its secrets tightly, but its emptiness screamed louder than words. The study revealed even darker secrets. Books lay toppled from the shelves, pages crumpled and torn as though ransacked by a desperate hand. Papers littered the floor in a chaotic swirl. On the heavy wooden desk sat a small notebook, its cover cracked and worn, edges frayed with age. The lamp on the desk still glowed faintly, its light flickering like the last heartbeat of the house. The officers approached slowly, the silence of the room almost deafening. The air smelled of dust and ink, mixed with something sour they couldn't place. One officer reached for the notebook, and as his gloved fingers touched it, a strange chill ran through him. This was not just an object. It was a relic, carrying the weight of something unnatural. The notebook seemed to pulse with importance, waiting to be opened, waiting to tell its story. They flipped it open. The first page was covered in handwriting so shaky it seemed carved rather than written. The words chilled them instantly. When everyone was asleep, I decided to keep the silence forever. It was not a confession. It was not even regret. It was a statement, deliberate and cold. Each letter seemed to echo inside the room, as though spoken aloud. The officers felt the floor beneath them grow heavier, the shadows darker. One whispered that it felt as though the writer were still here, watching, waiting. The message was short, but its weight was crushing. Whoever had written it had done so with full intent, with no hesitation. The notebook wasn't simply evidence. It was a voice from the abyss, a glimpse into a mind capable of erasing life with a terrifying calmness. The suspect, later identified, was only 17 years old. Neighbors recalled him as quiet, shy, almost invisible. Yet photographs told a different story. His eyes held shadows, deep pools of silence that hinted at something broken inside. Teachers described him as distant, disconnected, though no one had seen the storm gathering in his thoughts. The boy's family had been his world, yet perhaps also his prison. What twisted events, what silent rage had led him to that night? His youth clashed with the enormity of the crime, making it all the more haunting. Was this truly evil-born or evil-made? The officers who uncovered his story admitted later that they never forgot his face. Even years later, when shown his picture, they claimed his eyes seemed alive, still watching, still carrying that endless silence. In the aftermath, the house was sealed. Police tape stretched across the doorway, fluttering weakly in the icy wind. Windows were boarded up, hiding the darkness within. Neighbors walked quickly past, refusing to glance at it, as though even looking could invite misfortune. Stories spread of whispers heard at night, of faint lights flickering behind the broken curtains, of shadows in the windows when no one lived there. The building stood like a scar at the end of the street, a reminder of how fragile peace could be. The silence surrounding it deepened with every year, and soon it was more than a house. It became a ghost looming over the street, a silent figure haunting the memories of everyone who had once lived nearby. Years later, investigators stepped back into the house. Dust coated every surface, thick and suffocating. Cobwebs clung to corners. The air smelled of mold and age. The furniture had rotted, The walls cracked, yet the notebook remained, still sitting on the desk, untouched, waiting. Its pages had grown yellow, its words faint but legible. Silence forever. The phrase had not faded. The officers who entered that day reported an overwhelming sensation of being unwelcome. Some swore they heard faint footsteps upstairs, though the house was empty. One said the air was so heavy it felt like drowning. When they left, none of them ever returned. The house was abandoned again, left to decay. Yet its story remained, whispered in silence, remembered by all who dared to speak of it. Some say silence is peaceful, but in this house, silence became eternal. Do you believe the boy was simply born a monster, or was he shaped by forces no one will ever fully understand? Could a single choice, a single moment, push someone into the abyss? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to read your theories.